Camille had a bad morning today. Opening her eyes in the apartment in the center of Yekaterinburg, given to her by her father, a deputy, she turned her head on the huge bed. Two young men were lying next to her. And one of them was not only distinguished by stunning musculature, excellent build, but also absolutely dark-skinned. Style. That's wicked, Camille thought. Where was I yesterday? Where did I get her? Looking under the blanket, she realized she was completely naked. Empty whiskey bottles were lying on the floor. Leftover crabs and pieces of high-end cheeses were dying on the table, and helium-infused balloons with obscene inscriptions hung from the ceiling. She barely made it to the bathroom, showered, threw on a robe, and went into the kitchen. A few seconds later, holding a glass of orange juice in her hand and slurping the life-saving liquid from her bread, Camille materialized in the bedroom. Her nocturnal friends continued to sleep peacefully. Yours and amigos snoring. Let's wake up, get dressed, and get out of here. As they say, thank you everybody, you're free to go. Girlfriend, what are you so angry about this morning? What's wrong with you? Opened her eyes and went, smiling, asked Blondin. I did. I said thank you everybody. Do you hear what thank you says? I guess she doesn't remember anything. Baby, thank you. It's gonna cost you $500 for two. You called us on the phone, remember? If you don't believe me, I can give you the contact information. We're very civilized. Don't do that. I believe you. Judging by your appearance, you obviously didn't come here from Parliament, Camille sneered. Look at yourself. The dark-skinned Louis was offended, climbing out of bed in his mother's clothes. After getting their fee, the guys quickly left, made a phone call and disappeared. Show? But I was burning, Camille thought, coming to her senses. Then the cell phone rang and Cat's Papa's avatar appeared. Ollie, you have to take it, or he'll take away your allowance. What am I going to buy slaves with? I made a mental joke to the girl. Hi, Camille, what are you doing? French verbs, I repeat. I'm going to a Turkish lace show. I wanted to pick up some dabs for myself. It's incredibly trendy right now. We'll postpone. Get cleaned up, and we'll be ready in 0200 hours. We're going to a restaurant with a man I really need to brighten up our business meeting. He's got a thing for pretty girls. Dad, are you inviting me as bait? Your mother divorced you for a reason. Camille yelled into the phone. Her parents had divorced 10 years ago when Camille was an adult. She was 16 at the time. The divorce was hard, loud, with the smashing of expensive sets and abuse on both sides, as well as the sawing off of her father's hard-won property. Ethan Dowman had an early career. As soon as he graduated from the architectural faculty of a prestigious university, he immediately got into a large construction company. After 2 years, he became the head of department, and after 3 more, deputy general manager. During these years, Ethan managed to accumulate capital, and after a year and a little from the bundle took off, opening his own office. By this time, the young entrepreneur had acquired the necessary connections in the offices of power and people in epaulettes. He began to receive the most tasty orders for the construction of objects with money from the budget. When the Nufties came, Ethan Dowman had a well-oiled scheme that made it easy for him to get government money into his pocket. For example, during the construction of one city highway, he and the contractor made it a little bit already. However, in monetary terms, this little bit resulted in quite a tidy sum of several $1,000,000. Having acquired the coveted riches, Ethan wanted power. Only not cabinet power, but real power with the status of immunity, the right to invent funny laws and give them away into life. Scare the cops with a nice red crust, have beautiful, expensive women. The businessman Dowman decided to get a parliamentary mandate. It's done. He was given a competent pre-election PR campaign. He bought a house for several prisoners' families. New furniture, a dozen computers were brought to the orphanage. Cured a few retirees, and hello. He had a fabulous life. Sessions at which he could entertain himself with hearings of frankly idiotic proposals from parliamentarians like him. Noisy drinking outside the city, at the dakas, palaces of those who covered all this code. Lots of young beauties and even more money. His wife Emily had long been accustomed to his regular spots. And of course, she was not a naive bunny and not realizing where her husband got the gold dust. And she and her daughter have a posh, carefree life. But then Ethan, as they call it, got carried away. The proverb "gray in the beard, the devil in the rib" was not invented on an empty place, where the 10-year-old lover fell in love. His mind deprived him of the classic hunter for fat purses Emily. The girl was from the province, from a very simple family. Her parents worked at the local poultry farm, her mother as a companion and her father as a driver. For a small Ural town, they received quite a decent salary. The enterprise was a monopoly and fed half of the region with meat and milk. That's why salaries for good workers and parents of the girl were just so paid on time, bonuses were written out, and poultry farm products could be bought for pennies and the freshest. The parents were breaking for the sake of their only daughter. She had everything a provincial teenager needed to avoid feeling like an outcast. An expensive computer, a cell phone, the most fashionable rags and pocket money. Many of their classmates didn't have half of what she had, but the girl thought she deserved more, a lot more. Looking at herself in the mirror, she imagined herself in furs and diamonds that would suit her so well. And the amazing thing was, despite her childhood origins, Evelyn possessed the refined looks of a 19th century aristocrat. High forehead, brown, almost black eyes, graceful nose, scarlet lips, perfect shapes, and absolutely incredible hair, curly chestnut-colored. In the fall it came down below her knees and almost reached her heels. Evelyn was a smart girl. She graduated from school with a gold medal and immediately went to the capital, where she easily entered the Faculty of Economics. However, she studied solely for her Ekaterinburg diploma, not intending to spend the rest of her life working on accounting documents. Having obtained the coveted credentials, she went looking for a better share on the internet. Google gave her a list of the richest owners of status enterprises for free, and she decided to take the bull by the horns. In a way, in a literal sense, the company apparently appealed to her. First of all, it has been on the market for a long time. Secondly, the owner is a deputy, despite his age, is quite good, something like the actor Andrei Sokolov and that recognized heartbreaker. Clerks, lucky Ethan just needed an economist in the company. Indeed, the devil lies not only in the details, but also in such strange coincidences, although maybe it was the very ways of God which are inscrutable. After all, everything that happened changed the lives of several people at once. At that time, not even born yet. She went to the hairdresser, made of her marvelous mane high hairstyle, but with a secret. The snail of hair contained one single quench, but a tricky one. It was enough to touch it, as the whole construction collapsed supposedly unintentionally, and incredible Evelyn curls cascaded down on her shoulders. Envelops the space with author's perfume with notes of wormwood, mint, cedar, and red peony. White blouse, narrow pencil skirt just above the knee and minimal makeup. Are you interviewing? Yes, you're the last one in today and the first one out forever. Pretty sure she's going to win, Evelyn thought. And she was right. Ethan was already tired of applicants who, not having sufficient competence and experience to qualify for this position in his company, behaved as if he should offer them from the start a salary not lower than a ministerial salary, a private office, a car, and a vacation right away, right now. This was especially true of girls. Young people behaved more modestly, while claiming to be an economist, all who cannot lazy lawyers, philologists, builders. Even a pool cleaner in the past sent his resume. But the personnel department started, of course, did not even begin to call him back from sin. Clearly a crazy shot, albeit a priceless one. In a TV show, for example, or in the circus, anything, asked Ethan, the secretary. She was a professional of the highest caliber. Ethan's classmates, unlike his friends, Dauman had the good sense not to hire a damsel with legs from the ears and one crinkle, smoothly flowing things into those very legs. He understood how important a smart and dedicated secretary was to a business. So when his classmates Paula lost her husband in the 90s in the process of dividing up the business territory and was left penniless with 2 children, he willingly hired her. And she appreciated his gesture. For more than 20 years they have worked together. Paula would rip anyone's head off for her boss. No, Ethan, there's another girl sitting over there. She doesn't look like an idiot. Why don't you get some coffee, okay? I'm exhausted. Evelyn walked into the office, said hello, gave her resume number, but Ethan was already reading it. Paula had brought all the applicant forms in advance and put them on his desk. Dauman looked up at the girl from looking around and started asking questions. Evelyn answered them so naturally and without a fraction of coquetry that he relaxed. The conversation turned to a more trusting tone. After 40 minutes, Dauman breathed a sigh of relief. "Well, thank you, Lord. The job can be closed." Evelyn approached him. "Evelyn, would you like some coffee?" he asked. "I would not refuse." Evelyn Priadkina smiled at him. She stood up and went to the desk to supposedly pick up her resume. At that moment, with an elusive movement of her hand, Evelyn pulled out an appetizer and Ethan's throat constricted, as if in slow motion. Waves of auburn hair began to fall from the girl's head, and the smell of unknown herbs and flowers filled the office. "Oh, sorry." Embarrassed, Evelyn tried to gather her hair. Ethan sat at his desk with his mouth open. A month after his employment with the company, they'd begun a torrid affair, and 2 more months later he'd filed for divorce from Emily. She hadn't believed her ears at first, and when she realized her husband wasn't kidding, she'd made a huge scandal, smashing into the wall, the set Ethan's mother had given them for their wedding, cutting to shreds all his expensive suits in the closet, and had already gotten to his parliamentary ID. But Ethan was ahead of the exasperated woman. He swung his arm out, taking away the precious mandate. It made such a crack that Emily flopped back against the couch. "Sit down and listen to me. We've lived a good long life together, but I've fallen in love with another woman, and I want to be with her. Don't act like a hysterical fool. You and I have been sleeping in separate bedrooms for 5 years. What the hell is jealousy? Of course I'll provide you with everything you need. You'll keep the house. I'll give you a decent monthly living allowance. Enough for you to spend in your favorite Maldives. And don't you dare surprise me with a divorce." He left, slamming the door, and Emily was finally able to let out angry tears. Then she calmed down and thought that since her husband wasn't going to leave her and her daughter penniless, it wasn't so bad. Camille would be married in a couple of years, and all the money Ethan would give her would go to her. She's not old yet, and thanks to her husband's abilities and finances, she's constantly going to the beautician, getting enough sleep, not cooking, and cleaning their huge house. Speaking of the house, he said they'd keep the mansion out of spite. Oh. Emily suddenly remembered clearly that the house was originally registered to Ethan, not her, and he never remortgaged it. Which meant that sooner or later his young wife would be able to kick their asses out of here with her knee. Especially if Ethan overdoes it on the sexual front and inadvertently gives a hoot. They already had 2 such kamikazes among their acquaintances who had left their faithful wives, who had gone with them through poverty at the beginning of their careers, and hunger and loss of loved ones, who gave them the opportunity to enjoy the first steps of their sons and supported them always and in everything. Yes, the bodies of these women were not so firm and their health was not as perfect as in their youth. But they were relatives who wanted, had money and permissiveness men traded for beautiful asses and empty heads. As a result, a year later their young wives became very young and very rich, widows lumpy. Both entrepreneurs died of heart attacks. In their 60s moved Viagra, not denying themselves also leaders of whiskey and fatty place. Emily contacted her lawyer. She and her husband each had one, just in case. And this case just turned out to be quite suitable. The woman checked all the documents, and the case turned out to be even worse than they could assume. Emily, with her voluntary consent to divorce, would not get anything but an old dacha and a small monthly allowance of $50,000. And the mansion, 2 downtown apartments, a garage, a beauty salon, and 3 cars would go to Ethan legally. "You asshole," the woman exclaimed in her heart. "And all these years I thought he was a decent man." "Well, Emily, don't worry, we'll show him a goat on a helicopter." And they did. Emily sued for property division and daughter support, as well as alimony. Camille had just turned 16 at the time, so at least 2 more years of Dauman paying the full amount. The husband was shocked and gritted his teeth in anger, but he was forced to sign a settlement agreement and fulfill all the requirements of his wife. He really wanted to get Evelyn for his own use. Not being a fool, he realized that Mademoiselle Falls for him does not like, and with her looks and professionalism, Clerk turned out to be an excellent specialist. Tired of waiting, she may well find another Ethan younger and richer. After the divorce, Emily collected all the money, sold almost all the real estate in Russia, and emigrated to Spain. To her own sister, Camille refused to leave with her mother and stayed with her father and her young stepmother. The age difference between her and Evelyn was only 7 years. They got along. Her father bought her a luxury apartment, and her mother did not sell the house before she left, leaving it for emergencies or possible return to her homeland. Ethan didn't stress his daughter much, only made sure she didn't get involved with outright marginalized people or drugs. When she finished gymnasium, he got her into the Ural Institute of Humanities, from which she safely graduated. True, she was not going to work in her specialty. She lived so well, especially with such external data. Father did not in vain called his daughter Gold Weasel. From birth she had really almost golden-colored curls, slightly irregular facial features, and Igor's nose did not spoil but added charm. Attached to this was the figure of Marilyn Monroe. Camille adored the fashion of the 20s-30s from Renata's style and tried to look no less extravagant. Long dresses in the waist, elegant jewelry, suits, and not at all modern hairstyles in the spirit of Marlene Dietrich. At the same time, the girl possessed a healthy realism, a cold and calculating mind, and she was not hysterical like Emily. To all these already not very feminine qualities, as a creepy bonus, pathological cruelty and outright cynicism were attached. But more on that later. In fact, when Ethan had told his daughter to show up at the restaurant as a nice extra and possible bait for a companion, Camille's resentment had been feigned. She had a long history of helping her father in similar ways. Sometimes even slept with possible rivals, though on her own initiative, feeling she would help her father by turning on the intimacy much more quickly. Ethan pretended not to know anything about it. And Camille, after favorably concluded deals, Dalmana received a new mink manto or diamond necklace. Almost the Addams family did not bother to worry about ethics and decency, so everyone was happy. Goldie, don't be a fool. I'll see you tonight. Stephen will be perfectly calm by now, too. The power of Camille, of course. Where would I be without her, father replied. In the few years they had been together, he had become even more emotionally dependent on his second wife. Stephen Koroshilov was growing up, gaining experience. Except that she was not going to give birth to a son, Ethan, although he really wanted an heir. Despite the respectable age for a young father, Evelyn was in her prime. And Dalmanoy's money and connections would long serve to protect them from poverty and misery, to Ethan's credit. Having visited the house of Evelyn's parents only once, he was so impressed by the poverty of the Lilliputians, by the size of their Khrushchevka, that he bought his own excellent house outside the city. The father-in-law and mother-in-law did not expect such an attitude and, in turn, impressed by the generosity of the son-in-law and heartier than they had expected. Camille put on beauty, took out her dress under gold in the floor, and with a long slit to the beginning of the thigh, put in her ears exclusive earrings from Swarovski and bracelets in tone. Soon one of her father's cars appeared under the window and she went downstairs. She walked into the restaurant, expecting to see an older uncle sitting next to Ethan. But at the table was a young man whose appearance made her dizzy. Blue as the Italian sky, cat-like cut. Capricious eyes, perfectly shaped lips, smart black hair tucked in a bundle, dimples on his chin, and a Roman profile of an athletic figure. But without overhanging muscles, the man looked like a real aristocrat. Snow-white shirt, stylish suit. Gold stared at this masterpiece created by nature and man in all eyes. "Oh, there's my daughter." Ethan turned around. "Villain, sit down, we've been waiting for you, and we're getting acquainted. This is Wacław Donarski, my partner from Poland." "Nice to meet you," Camille replied with your lips. "And how pleasant it is for me," frankly looking at the girl, replied the guest. Camille blushed for the first time in her life. "It's stuffy in here," she said. "Is it?" Evelyn intervened with a sneering glare. "It's well air-conditioned, I hadn't noticed. Maybe you're hormonal or something." Camille kicked Evelyn under the table with the sharp toe of her shoe, assuming she was into the guy too. And frankly, it was impossible not to fall for him unless you had eyes or already had the love of your life. Meanwhile, the conversation turned to business discussions about supplies, goods, prices, competitors, logistics problems. The girls got bored pretty quickly. "We'll go under the spout." Smiling, Evelyn warned her husband and took Camille's hand. "Of course you are." The girls went out, holding hands like foams. But when they reached the ladies' room, Camille burst out angrily, "Don't even think of opening your mouth at him. I'll salt you right away." She pinned you against the wall with fury. "Stepmother is very necessary." Arachka hid her lips. He's an Alfonso, you can tell. And I think he doesn't have a penny to his name. And you, a fool, just once behaving on nice pants. As for me, I've been living with your father for years. I've been smart enough not to screw up once in all that time. What makes you think I'm gonna risk it now for some polished guy with Mosley? And who knows who? Idiot, take my hands off me, he barked, and she pushed the gold away from her, somehow deciding that he was an Alfonso and without a penny of money. What business could he have with my father then? Not calming down and turning on her head, Camille asked, "My hands? I don't know. I don't like him," thinks my feminine intuition. Evelyn answered her calmly. She, too, knew how to take herself in hand almost instantly. In this they were golden alike. Having conquered and finally tried on life, the ladies returned to the table. Ethan sat, having reached his jacket, and laughed infectiously. Apparently a joke on Vaclav. After about an hour he left, taking his wife with him. "You two go for a walk. It's a child's time," kissing the golden one on the top of her head and looking at her expressively, Ethan said, "With pleasure." Vaclav and his daughter answered him at the same time. This time Camille was completely sincere. When the father and Evelyn left, Camille poured herself a glass of Spanish wine, drank it in one gulp, and turned to Vaclav. "Tell me about yourself," she asked. "Come on. There's no need for these ceremonies. Everything is obvious and clear. I also want you very much." Come to me with a cheeky confidence that he would not be refused. The strange Pole answered her. They stood up in silence and went downstairs, where an automobile with a driver was waiting for Mr. Donerski. They drove for a long time, about an hour. At last the car stopped. They got out of Camille, saw a small cottage surrounded by pine trees. "Please, Pani, come in," smiled Vaclav, and Camille finally lost her head. They walked silently through the hall and found themselves in the bedroom. What happened next? Camille remembered the whole next day with a heartbeat. It was a fireworks of feelings, new sensations, emotions. They couldn't stop, couldn't get enough of each other, dragging themselves into the abyss of pleasure. It was already dawning when the golden Wenceslas were able to tear themselves away from each other. Two heads golden like the sun and black like this night of love lay side by side. During the night the hair, gathered in a neat bundle, had shot off, and it turned out that Vaclav's was even longer than Camille's. But it suited him very well. He was as handsome as a Greek god, or rather a demon filled with passion. Vaclav turned to the girl, "Marry me." Suddenly he said. Then he stood up, threw on an embroidered silk robe, and went out. He returned 10 minutes later, sat down next to the dazed Camille, and handed her a small box of black velvet. As if in a fog, she opened it and saw a ring of stunning beauty with a black, rich, heart-shaped ring framed by black diamonds. "What is it?" With her lips she asked. "It's my great-grandmother's ring. It's hereditary, and it's given to the future wife of male donors. There is another one for the girls of our lineage, with a purple garnet. So will you marry me?" "Yes, yes, yes, yes," almost shouted Camille and rushed to kiss Vaclav. Their strange acquaintance, the instant marriage proposal, did not embarrass the girl at this moment. Even if she had been told that Vaclav was a thief, a murderer, and a beggarly swindler, it would not have stopped her. She had many men. She did not deny herself anything in terms of sexual freedom and choice of partners. She liked a lot of people. Some of them had affairs, sometimes brief, sometimes lasting months, or even a year. Most of them asked Camille to marry, but none of them had as much power over her mind and body as this tangle that had come from nowhere. The phone rang and Camille picked it up. It was father. "Hello, Camille, sweetheart. I've been feeling a little restless since yesterday." "Are you all right, baby?" Ethan asked worriedly. He very rarely called her baby, and he almost never called her at 0700, knowing that she'd go to nightclubs and then sleep through the afternoon so she wouldn't pick up the phone. And that's not worth worrying about. And then called all the same father's heart is also things. Even if that father is a cynic and a cuckold, he's not much of a cynic. "Yes, Dad, I'm fine. You can't even imagine how much I'm getting married." Also unexpectedly calling Ethan Daddy, replied the younger Dalman. "Where are you getting married?" "How?" paused Ethan. "Marriage, Dad. Vaclav proposed to me and I accepted." There was a vacuum in the phone, like in outer space. Then Ethan apparently gathered his courage and said, "Both of you come to my dacha." I'll be expecting them in 2. When they arrived at their father's country house and went inside holding hands, they were met by Ethan. Stephen looked out from the corner of the room and looked at the gold and twisted his finger at his temple. I'm listening to you, Vaclav. Ethan, I love your daughter and I'm asking for her hand in marriage. Yes, we know each other so little that I can be suspected of frivolity at least, and at most of inadequacy. But believe me, I'm not. I'm 35 years old, the only son in the family. My father has businesses in Poland, the US and Russia. But you know about that? You did business with him a few years ago. It's been great. He owns a chain of straw goods stores, as well as drugstores and boutiques. I own a general interest in a chain of brand-name clothing boutiques. I've never had a woman like your daughter. And I'm pretty sure we were made for each other. Ethan smoked, looked at Donskoy and remained silent. I need to meet your parents. Of course, I'll contact them today. In the meantime, I'll leave the golden one in your care. I'll call you. Wait for me at home, he whispered, kissing her. Camille, are you sure of your choice? He asked his daughter. I don't know, Dad, but I can't live without him, she replied. She poked him in the shoulder and cried softly, like when she was a little girl. You had business plans with him when you made the appointment. So he's rich and decent? Yes, I met with him, but to re-engage with his father, the older Dano we used to work with a very successful smile of his own, said Dauman. Okay, I'll meet with Stanislaw. After all, you can always get a divorce. Only I have a prenuptial agreement, Daddy, even 5 agreements. Camille hung around her father's neck. The wedding was lavish. In Yekaterinburg you gathered 300 guests. Then the young people went to Poland and celebrated there. Camille Emily's mother did not come, citing ill health, but explained to her daughter by phone that it was beyond her strength to see her ex-husband together with Evelyn. Sent about gold wonderful set of jewelry and a tidy sum on the account. In Spain, Emily opened her own business. What was her advice to similarly abandoned wives? How to survive after the betrayal of the second half and no harm with reason. Already in 2 months, Camille realized that she was pregnant and was terribly happy about it. They lived in Vaclav's mansion. He was affectionate with her, dusted off his wife, constantly spoiled her with some trinkets, them romantic dinners and trips to Soviet events. Camille was over the moon. When Vaclav learned of his wife's pregnancy, he was as happy as Camille. Maybe even more. It's wonderful, my little golden boy, he said, stroking his wife's head affectionately. The pregnancy went well, and at a certain date they were told they would have a daughter. Camille was a little upset. She wanted to please her husband with a son and heir to the family, and Vaclav, on the contrary, brightened up. Imagine, she'll have blue eyes like mine and golden hair like yours. A real Polish queen. The delivery room was prepaid and waiting for Camille. The doctors had scheduled the birth for July 15th, but the woman began to have contractions on the first day, and Vaclav and Ethan urgently took her to a private clinic. The labor went quickly. Camille did not even have time to feel pain. You have a very pretty little girl. Are you in? A nurse brought the baby to her room after a while. Come on, the young mother smiled and took the package in her hands, but when she saw who was in it, she almost lost her mind. A dark-skinned baby girl with obvious African-American ancestry looked up at her from the diaper. The nurse had already left and Camille sat on the bed with the dark-skinned baby in utter horror. That's when it's blonde Louis. Then it's night. Oh God, no, flashed through her mind, shaking with terror. She pressed the button to summon the head doctor. Michael had been in charge of this clinic for a long time and had seen a lot of things, but what the patient had told him was unbelievable. She was almost beating her head against the wall, screaming that it was not her daughter, that she had been planted by gypsies and other nonsense. In the end, the baby had to be carried out and fed with formula. Camille Echapovna, finally, he said, calm down. Otherwise I'll have to give you a sedative, and you can't. You need to feed your daughter. I won't feed her. That's not my daughter. That's my blue eyes with golden hair. Yes, it is. Quiet. I'll help you. A young woman died in childbirth today at the maternity hospital where my sister works. She has no family. Her sister's been with her since the first day of her pregnancy, so there's no one to look for her. We'll even have to bury her on the government's dime. Anyway, she had a daughter, and she looks just like you. White, blue eyes. The child is perfectly healthy. We were planning to put her up for adoption when she's older. Kids like that are always in demand. But since you're so grieving, you realize it costs a lot of money. Michael, honey, I'll pay you 100,000,000,000,000,000,000,000. Of course, I'll do it. Kneeling down in front of the enterprising, the physician whispered in a hoarse, tearful voice, Camille, 100,000,000,000,000,000,000,000,000 is not necessary. But this amount is enough. The doctor drew on a piece of paper figures with 6 zeros. You understand, I'm not the only one in the business, and your little girl will need to be placed quietly. But how will we take the child from that maternity hospital? We have to do it now. My husband's coming tomorrow. Don't worry about that. Vanessa and I will bring the baby in now. And you rest in the meantime. Just tell me, where's your discharge stuff? We interrupted right away. We know her, so no one will suspect anything. Yes, of course, Camille fussed, gathering her daughter's dowry in a bag. Suddenly the thought struck her that her own black daughter was probably more likely to be put into an orphanage. Who would want her like that? But her heart did not ache with pity for her own child. Camille was scared that the nurse who saw her real daughter and the midwife who delivered her might blab. Even if it wasn't now, Michael will pay them well out of her allotted fees, but it could be 5-7 years from now. These women could be fired. They'd have to live on something. And nowadays, the risk of going on a TV show and telling a very interesting story about the life of the daughter of a rich MP is very high. The idea that if the participants of the child swap someday want to go to journalists and tell them this terrible story, they will not be able to prevent them at all. It came into her criminal head that she had to do something like crazy. She threw on her robes, quietly went out into the corridor, walked past the wards, looking for the one where the babies were waiting for their mothers for the first hours of their lives. She followed her child like a predator after a stranger, to take his life, not to let him see this beautiful world, to close all possibilities for the birth of the next new life. Finally, she heard a tiny cry and realized she had found what she was looking for. She pushed the door open with her hand and immediately saw her daughter. This was a private, very expensive clinic, and there wasn't much blood flow, only 6. A dark-skinned baby girl, sleeping sweetly, fed a delicious formula. When Camille took her in her arms, she didn't even wake up. The delinquent mother quietly went outside, into the grove that was next to the maternity hospital for the rich. Then she went farther beyond the fence and saw a thick thicket of some bushes. She put the baby right in the center, and next to it placed a note, which she had quickly written in her room, and a bundle of $5,000 bills, totaling 500,000 rubles. Then she rushed back to the ward. Behind her there was a dog barking. But even that fact didn't stop or frighten her that the dogs might tear up her baby. She hated that crap, as she called it mentally. Also, Camille Domana did not think about the fact that if a child with such a huge amount of money is found by some scumbags, they will just take them away. But they wouldn't do anything to help the baby. Back at the clinic, Camille went to bed and fell asleep. She was awakened 0300 hours later by Michael. Standing next to him was a woman holding a whistle. She held it out, There you had a lot of diapers with the donor's monogram on them. We dressed out of orange whether the girl, as it should be, she said. Feed her, she's hungry. Camille took the baby, looked at the face and calmed down. Blue eyes looked up at her. The tiny mouth pressed against her breast and the girl sweetly. Why the milk shots? You are my daughter, mine and Vaclav's. Arjena. She told herself mentally like a monster. I had nothing to do with it. It was a dream, just a dream, a nightmare. And now it's over. That's it. 15 minutes later, Michael literally flew into the room. Camille, your daughter disappeared from her crib. God be with you, Michael. My daughter is in my arms, and she hasn't disappeared. Did you languish for a period of time? Of course, I had a difficult labor. I freaked out the whole clinic. The baby was coming through the navel, not the head. And I looked at the doctor. And to fix your nerves? I'm nursing my baby girl now and I'll immediately transfer $200,000 to your card. Okay, just as a token of my appreciation for your participation. The doctor realized that his patient had something to do with the disappearance of the unfortunate child. But knowing her father's temper and the enormous trouble the Dauman scandal would bring him, he nodded silently. After all, I hadn't touched her child. Most likely, she'd arranged for someone she knew to pick her up. While I went to the hospital to pick up Vanessa, with that thought in mind, he dictated his card number. But Michael could not even suppose that his rich patient from an intelligent family could throw her own child on the street like a dead kitten. Although a decent person would never throw away a kitten, but would try to find a shelter for it. In the morning, Vaclav arrived, shining like a copper penny, and he was incredibly proud to be a grandfather. Of course, he would have liked a son by Evelyn, but a granddaughter by Camille was also very nice. They ran around Camille as well as country mice, gathering her things. Stephen had long since abandoned his suspicions about Vaclav. She even told her about her little affairs with Ethan, knowing that Camille would not give her up. Having received an awesome and a prize in the form of Vaclav, she had completely calmed down. Donos Jr. confirmed his solvency in business and quite a decent income. By the way, unlike his father-in-law, deputy and father, who was doing some dark things with Ethan, he was doing business honestly. At least as much as the current reality allowed. A nursery was already set up at home, and the young family waited for the polished grandparents to come to visit. Camille had quite put her own daughter out of her mind as an unfortunate episode, and not once did her heart feel anything. The adopted girl she sincerely considered as her own, especially since it soon became clear that she was as much a golden mask as Camille. A month after birth, babies often have a change in eye color. For example, a baby may be born as an eye and a couple of weeks later have blue eyes. But Jenna's eyes were still bright blue, so it never occurred to anyone to think that the girl was a donor with whom she was not related. 20-year-old culinary school graduate Nancy again delayed on the night shift at the restaurant, wrinkled dishes, and once again went to another reality in a drunkenness. Didn't notify the public or her co-workers at work. Apparently, she just didn't have time. She took on her chest and withdrew into sweet dreams. On the other side of the mind has its own laws. And time there, too, flows in a special way. So Nancy had not only to cook, but also to wash the mountains of dirty plates and pots, and then scrub the floors and take out several bags of garbage. Not fired for the reason that she never quarreled with anyone, was always ready to help even for the smallest of reasons. And the owner of the restaurant, William, never refused his requests to wash dishes. At the same time and in his bachelor apartment restaurant. That's a bit of a mouthful. Only William himself was proudly considered to be such a restaurant. In fact, there was nothing stellar about it. A motley crowd gathered here, local marginalized people who had at least some work, and therefore sometimes money for booze, blatants, casual visitors, passengers waiting for their train, business travelers living in a hotel. Nearby girls of not very heavy demeanor talked, really, in stargazing. Not bad, and largely thanks to Nancy and her talent, she came out of the walls of the technical school with a red diploma and loved her profession. She walked home. She wanted to go for a walk. She knew the neighborhood well, so she was not afraid to walk late. And she had nothing to take. She had asked William to transfer her tiny salary to her grandmother's pension card, with whom they lived in a dilapidated wooden house that had long been in need of repair. But they didn't complain. The phone and Nancy possessed the most forgiving. To whom? As for possible attacks on her honor, the girl was able to impose on anyone. So then the doctors would long to collect the idiot who dared to violence. In addition to the rundown house, they had a small vegetable garden where they planted potatoes, carrots, cabbage, and various herbs. There was also a bathhouse, but it was quite tiny. There was even a kazan giving tasty, healthy milk, a rooster, Beethoven, and 3 hens. Nancy had given the rooster such a strange name. It's very unusual to crow with a soul and a method. Granny used milk to make butter and cheese, and Beethoven's girlfriends laid eggs. Of course, money was catastrophically lacking, but Nancy brought second salads from the restaurant, and sometimes cakes left over from banquets and weddings. And her grandmother sometimes worked part-time. Vanessa used her special talent for fortune-telling, removing the evil eye, curing barley and some other non-fatal ailments. This ability was passed down through generations on their mother's side. Nancy's mother disappeared from her sight when she was 3 years old. She'd run off to another town with some military man and left Vanessa in his arms. Nobody knew anything about her father. It was obvious that he was there, but God only knows where he had gone. An hour later, she was almost close to the house and sat down on a bench for a drink of water. It was very hot and stuffy outside. July, after all. She settled down right next to the thick bushes, and about 100 meters away from them was a very expensive elite clinic for ladies with fat purses. Suddenly, Nancy saw a woman in a robe approaching her bench at a brisk pace. In her hands, she was holding a package of some kind. That's a strange-looking woman. 3, actually. But the robe is very expensive. Even from here, you can see what the hell. And it took her so long to get here. I thought about it and wanted to approach with an offer of help, but I ran out. A young and very beautiful woman with absolutely crazy eyes put the package in the bushes and rushed back. Somewhere nearby, a dog was barking, and from the timbre of the animal it was clear that it was a large breed. Nancy stood up from the bench and held out her hands to the bundle. When she opened the blanket, she nearly dropped the find from her hands. There was a baby girl sleeping sweetly in it. Nancy took her in her arms, moved closer to the streetlight, and saw that the baby was dark-skinned for the better part of an hour. It didn't get any easier. A note fell out of the blanket: I relinquish this baby, and do not consider it mine. If you find the girl, you can safely take her for yourself. No one will ever know about it and will pursue you and make a claim. A huge Rottweiler rushed past, followed apparently by its owner, a young man. Nancy clutched the baby to her chest and took a quick step home. The grandmother, of course, was awake, waiting for her granddaughter to come home from work. Nancy entered the house and placed the baby on her bed, then held out the note she had found to Vanessa. She looked up at her granddaughter in surprise, read it, and said, "Wow. I thought the cards were showing me a child. I wondered if you were pregnant." Although, on the other hand, I would have noticed right away. She went over to the baby, took the baby in her arms. She whimpered softly, "I've got milk and cookies on the stove." "I'm afraid." "What's there to feed? She's a newborn, she's tiny. What a creature her mom is. God forgive her. Why didn't you give her to an orphanage? If you don't need her, at least there's shelter and food there." "At least she had a bottle, you scum." "Don't swear. We have bottles. I bought them a while ago. I was planning on draining them. There was a promotion at the drugstore. They sold them with a pacifier. Get a new bottle from our medicine cabinet." A couple of them had boiled milk diluted with a little water. That's what goat's milk is, an allergen. But the girl is really quite small. They fed the poor little girl, betrayed by the closest person in the world since she was born, and laid her in Nancy's deep bed. Vanessa made water and dill, cut some diapers from an old chintz, and pulled a cardboard box from the closet. Here she kept her mortal money. Like many pensioners born in Soviet times, she had already accumulated about 300,000, and no one knew about these savings, not even Nancy. "Well, Vanessa, let's live a little longer," she thought. "We have to save the girl, get her registered with us. I'll go to Molly, she won't say no. We'll say that the child is Nancy, that the guy was from Moscow, he promised to marry her. Yeah, he cheated. It's all over the place nowadays. And girls have babies for themselves. And that she's dark-skinned, she's not so black. She's more like chocolate. Didn't you see a belly in my picture? She's skinny. And the first babies are always born small." The old woman with the branch was making plans in her head. She had a best friend, Vanessa, who worked in foster care. In fact, Nancy's grandmother was not old at all. She had just turned 58. A middle-aged woman by today's standards. Another thing is that she lived in difficult living conditions, had never been to the sea, and had only seen cosmetic salons in TV series. In her youth, she had been quite an attractive woman, and even now, with the right makeup and stylish clothes, she would be no different from a city office worker. She and Nancy were both tall and slender, almost 175 centimeters. Her granddaughter had been teased at school during her childhood years with a paddle. However, closer to graduation, the girls who dreamed of a modeling career even began to envy her. As for appearance, it was at Nancy universal. She could act in movies and work in intelligence agencies depending on her makeup and clothes. She could be anything from a humble bee to a superstar. True, she had never considered the latter option for herself. There was neither the need nor the opportunity. She and her grandmother slept the rest of the night, taking turns worrying about the baby. In the morning, the cub was fed, and Vanessa called her granddaughter in for a serious talk. "Nancy, I want to talk to you. About 2 weeks before you found that poor little girl, I was fortune-telling, and I kept getting some kind of addition to the family, a baby, a destiny, a child, a destiny. This kind of fortune-telling never falls out at all, or very rarely. And if it happens only to hereditary sorcerers. I could never understand how you and I could have a baby. And here we are. Anyway, I suggest that you and I take this girl and raise her as our own bud. Do I have a problem with that? Sure. Go ahead. Anyway, I wasn't listening. You're going to have to take her mother's sin upon yourself and acknowledge her as your child before men and God. You're going to have to pretend you had a man outside of marriage who left you pregnant. Are you ready for that in your 20s? I'm not insisting. If you're not, I'll find a way. The girl won't be left on the street, of course. But you could give her some real motherly love and support. Trust me, you'll get 100-fold return. This is a special child. She shouldn't have been born under such terrible circumstances. But it's just the way it is. I guess I don't have time to think about it. Does the baby need a mom? I agree. Go to Molly's foster home. Especially since you and I have the money now. We can fix up our house. I don't want to move into an apartment. Bah, we have to buy a stroller now. Things for the baby. Our New York formula is a very cool goat, but this is the 21st century, and Wendy needs a normal, balanced milk product. What did you call her? Wendy. It's a gift from God. And it's Old Slavic, meaning gift of fate. Let's give her a middle name. Wendy. We'll have Wendy. Date of birth July 2nd, 2000. I'll sit here. You take a cab, get what you need. Vanessa took the baby in her arms, fed her mink and milk, pressed the girl to her breast, and sang Lioli, Luli, Luli. They flew. Luli, 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 Luli. Gulliver began to forge. And Wendy fell asleep. The little girl sang and fell asleep. Vanessa looked at her and remembered how she rocked her daughter in her arms, running away, abandoning Nancy. Her Miranda was not a bitch, more like a frivolous and not very smart girl. Vanessa, of course, could not give her big bonuses in life, but she tried very hard to make her daughter grow up to be a person who had no complaints about the world and life. She almost succeeded. Miranda tried very hard to live right, but due to its duration constantly got into some unpleasant stories, mostly of a love nature. Her last adultery had ended in pregnancy, then childbirth. Vanessa helped her daughter as much as she could, but it was no use. Miranda once again found in their small town the love of her life in the form of a flight lieutenant and left with him for Moscow. Strangely enough, he didn't leave her, and life in the capital got better for Miranda. Her husband sent her to study at a pedagogical school for elementary grades. They married and had 3 children. But Miranda did not want to hear anything about her first daughter and never came to her hometown again. She remained an orphan with a living mother. In the morning, Nancy called a cab and went to the regional center to get a stroller, a dowry of formula, and a feeding bottle. When she walked into the baby store, her eyes widened. How many things? Anyway, she picked out 10 sets, several packages of diapers, toys, a stroller, and a wonderful crib with toys that can be hung. All this goodness was brought to them in 2. Vanessa had already packed up and headed to the care center, leaving it to her granddaughter. She had made an appointment with Molly in advance. She didn't say why. The friend of her youth met her with joy, but also with curiosity. It had been years since they'd seen each other. The last time Vanessa had come to see her was after her daughter's elopement, to draw up the documents for Natalia's granddaughter. How old is the bride? Come on in. Molly candy, coffee, and excellent cognac. Realizing that her friend had come on some very serious business, she called her secretary and warned her not to disturb them. What's up? The friend lays it out and she told her everything. Molly listened very attentively, taking notes in a small notebook as she spoke. When Vanessa finished her story, her friend told her we'd get the certificate from the hospital. And all the documents for the girl too. But I don't need the money, you understand. Of course. But the birth mother left the deed of gift. There's a lot of money in there, and I have it. I've saved up what you've saved up to fix up the house, or you'll get screwed by rounds and inspections. I know that for a fact. Why don't you let me send you some guys I know? They'll raise the foundation, change the floors, and put a 100 bathtub in the house in the summer. Winter will be here in 4 months. Where will you bathe your granddaughter? No one. Never. Do you hear? No one. And don't ever tell me what your granddaughter told me today. Thank you, Molly, thank you. I really felt today that I live and work in this damn system for a reason. You can't even imagine how tired I get sometimes of the mismatch between what I want and what's legal. The documents were formalized. The house was restored in 3 months, so that love to see. They put a great fence, changed everything from floor to ceiling. The old bathhouse was demolished, and at the expense of it they expanded the yard, where Nancy and her grandmother planted cherry trees. And the house was made twice as big, adding a second story and an addition. Nancy retired from Williams' restaurant, bought a computer, and completed several popular courses. She quickly figured out how to make a living on the internet without leaving home or the baby, and life went on as usual. 18 years passed. Jenna Donorski returned from another screening, in tears. Her dream of becoming a supermodel was again not destined to come true. She bypassed 3 more agencies, but the girl lacked height. With those barely gained 165 centimeters and needed at least 170. But the external data at the same time she was very, very good. Balakan already almost like the snow maiden with blue eyes and hair the color of autumn gold. Okay, modest. They had been living in Moscow for a long time, having moved from Yekaterinburg. As soon as they were a year old here, Václav's business was going great. And Camille opened a small salon, where the representatives of Bohemian social leftists, lionesses, prominent politicians, in general, the capital gathered, and not just the Bohemians. Over the years, she almost did not change outwardly, especially since money allowed to maintain an attractive appearance for a long time. She and her husband wondered what kind of bliss interfered in the clever head of their only daughter. The girl excelled in school, and the exact sciences of physics, chemistry, and mathematics were given to her surprisingly easy. Since childhood, she picked up kittens and birds with broken legs and wings on the street and dragged them home to be treated. As she grew older, she became interested in the history of viruses and epidemics, starting in the Middle Ages. So the parents had no doubt that their daughter would choose medicine and go to study virology. But right after graduation, everything changed. Since then, I went with my girlfriends to a fashion show and got acquainted there with a model of the same age. In the girl was unusual everything, starting with the appearance and ending with the name. Her name was Wendy Smooth, with blue eyes and brown curly hair, with a great figure and amazing plasticity. And the story goes like this. During a break between shows, Jenna went into the ladies' room and saw there an enraged, dark-skinned, beautiful model who held in her hands shoes whose heels were torn off, as they say, with meat. No, but aren't they grebes, bitches, cats, cunts? I'm leaving in 5 minutes. What am I wearing? What I've got doesn't fit. What's wrong? There's something I can do to help. What's there to help? These bitches ripped the heels off my shoes. I don't have anything to wear on the runway. Take mine. I took my shoes off in a flash. Bitch. Their brand name, very nice. And the heel is almost 12 centimeters. Then the black ones go with any dress or suit. I think we're the same size. You're a 38. The girl took the shoes in her hands and stretched them out in surprise. Yes, 38. And how did you determine? Wow, they really fit. Thank you. I'll get you some shoes. A pair. They came out of the restroom. The dark-skinned beauty rushed to her dressing room and brought her savior a nice pair of shoes. Here in a couple hours we'll switch. Thank you, I'm Wendy, and sent her an air kiss, Jenna. She said admiringly to her new acquaintance. While the gift-giving went well, there was a standing ovation. Especially emotional admirers of her talent threw bouquets of roses under her feet. The incredible beauty of the girl conquered at first sight. Of course, there was obvious presence of Finnish blood in her, but her facial features were thin, almost aristocratic. Wendy did not know that her negligent walking father named Louis, who had once visited her mother's bedroom for money, was an Ethiopian of Russian descent. Representatives of this people are not in vain considered one of the most beautiful nations on earth. The nose of a woman without a bruise, neat. The lips are graceful, and the figures are like statuettes. Few people know that it is Ethiopia that is the birthplace of coffee. Paradoxically, beer, as well as oats and domestic donkey. Mentions of this are in the Persian prophet Mani. And not just him, thank you, dear. You have no idea how much. Wendy flew out after the show to the lobby where Jenna was waiting. Here's your shoes. I owe you one. Let's go sit somewhere. Yeah, looking at her new friend like a creature of the highest order, Jenna replied. The young model looked fantastic in a blue, shiny tunic and short skirt, revealing long, perfectly shaped legs. Blue, the shade of her eye and skin not black, but dark chocolate colored. They hit it off. Wendy told me that she is originally from the Urals, where her mother and grandmother stayed. They have their own big house dog, Tamara, two Maine Coon with a serious character. Her father, according to Irina, could not stay in Russia and had to leave the country. But she left a large sum of money for her and her mom before they left, so there was enough for the house, for living, and for her going to Moscow. She had known since 7th grade that she was going to be a model. Her mother grumbled at first, but then, having seen her on the catwalk in high school, she immediately agreed. Impressed, I guess, smiling with white teeth and sipping a margarita, Wendy said. I was inimitable. And you? You're a Muscovite, aren't you? You won't believe it, but I was born in Yekaterinburg too. We lived there when I was very young. Then my parents moved to Moscow, my grandfather and my deputy. He stayed there. My dad is a pure-blooded Pole, a handsome man. But I look more like my mom. By the way, maybe you know her salon? It's where all the Moscow bohemians gather. It's called Golden Camille. It's your mom's salon. Wow. I've heard of this salon, but I've never been there. Would you like to? You're asking? It's a deal. We'll go together on Saturday. I'll invite you. Invitations are on me. Jenna, can I have two? I'm with my boyfriend. Is he a model too? Of course. Tonight she went to her mom and asked for 2 VIP invitations to her party. Surprised? Affectionately stroking her daughter's head, Camille said. You've never been interested in social life. What's up? Oh, Mom, I met such a model. You're going to fall. She's a real straight-up model, real, very cool. Actually, the invitations are for her. Well, okay, sure. Kitten Camille in these 18 years never once remembered her crime before her own child, before God, before people. Strangely enough, she never dreamt of the girl. She never had nightmares about it at all. So the postulate that only people with a clear conscience sleep peacefully is not true. Here it is not a matter of a clean or dirty conscience, but in the principle of the ability or inability of a person to analyze themselves, their actions, their lives. After all, what is conscience? It is a soul. It is guardian angels. Every person has them, regardless of whether he is a murderer or a priest. And this is absolutely certain. Another question is that often people do not hear and do not see their sincere efforts to bring people to the light. And not everyone wants to go to the light. Some people are very happy with the dark side of the moon. It's easier with the dark ones. You don't have to agonize, worry, suffer. Throw the baby in the bushes and go on to a beautiful new life. Camille went through life, not realizing that everything in this world will have to be answered for. Perhaps God took into account the fact that she brought up someone else's child as her own. And here is the paradox: Camille sincerely considered Jenna her own daughter, loved her, spoiled her. Maybe there was some kind of shift in her psyche. Who knows? On Friday evening, Jenna dressed for the upcoming event and went to the post office. She was looking forward to seeing her new friend. Finally, she showed up. Wendy came in with a young man, also very handsome and stylishly dressed. Jenna grabbed them and dragged them towards the gold. Introductions. Mom, introductions. This is Wendy, and she was looking at Louis' boyfriend, smiling. Camille's reaction to the name was quite strange. In Jenna's opinion, she turned so pale that she almost fainted. The woman was looking at Doreen and her companion with glassy eyes. Her? Cold sweat. It was as if she had seen a ghost. Camille slowly lowered herself into the chair, not taking her eyes off the boys, the girl looking at her confusedly. Not feeling well. Not understanding the reason for this reaction? Asked Wendy. No, I'm fine, squeezed out the gold. I'm just dizzy. I'm going to drink some water now and everything will be fine. Mom, I'll get you some kagak. Jenna got worried and ran away. Yes, okay, Camille had a picture of almost 20 years ago in front of her eyes. She wakes up in bed with two young men, kicks them out the door after paying them. The dark-skinned, handsome one is called Louis by his boyfriend. Then shots of flashbacks shift to the maternity ward. She is a happy mother and waits for her baby girl to be brought in for her first feeding. And she does. But it's not Camille's daughter. It's a monster, a monster, a monster. Camille fainted. When she came to, she saw a terrified Vaclav and Jenna beside her. She had called her father, not realizing what was happening to her mother. Camille smiled through the force and said that there was no cause for concern. She was just tired and that was all. Jenna took Doreen and her friend away and met with people who could help her new friend in advancing her modeling career. Her friend chatted merrily with a fashion producer. Louis told stories and anecdotes from the bohemian life. In the company of young theater actors, Vaclav helped his wife up, and they went to her office, where she lay on a small sofa. "What's the matter with you?" "My sunshine," covering her with a fluffy plaid, he asked. "It's all right, Vaclav." She gently stroked her husband's face. He hadn't aged a bit over the years, and he looked as stunning as he had when they'd met. In those 18 years, they had never even had a serious argument. They've lived soul to soul, almost like a fairy tale. And that's an amazing case, too. Why didn't God punish Camille for her terrible sin? Maybe saving Jenna and sparing her from the fate of an abandoned child somehow contributed to the karma plus. "Vaclav, darling, you go home. I'm going to the guest house. This is awkward. People bought tickets to the event. The play's about to start. I've invited the actors, I've paid for everything, and I'm just sitting here. It's not nice. I'm sure you're fine, but fine. Just don't drive today. I don't know how it's going to turn out. Call me. I'll send a car for you." "I will." The evening dragged on. The play went well. Then there was dancing, raffles, prizes that Camille had prepared in advance for her guests. Vaclav called back twice and finally calmed down about his wife's condition. It was already 2 on the clock. The poem had gone out an hour ago. They went to a nightclub. Camille did not pull her husband and decided to drive herself. She hardly consumed alcohol that day, except for that shot of cognac. But that was at 19. She started her Audi and drove home out of town, where they had built a luxurious mansion. There were quite a few cars on the highway, despite the late hour. Camille started to turn at an intersection and did not make it. There was a clang, a rumble, and she fell out of the existing reality. Vaclav, Jenna, and Wendy were sitting in the emergency room of the hospital waiting for the golden one after the accident. It was already 2 when they operated. The girl called her after the accident, sobbing, and she immediately came to support her. Finally, a young doctor came out to her and asked, "Are you relatives?" "What's wrong with Mom?" In dry saliva from fear asked the girl. "She needs blood, but she has a very rare group, and in combination with the negative Rh factor, so in general, a unique 4th, negative. Only 6% of people on the planet have that group. I don't know where we're going to find a donor now. I'm O negative," Wendy said out of the blue. "Must be my dad's, my mom's is different. So you're willing to help?" "Of course I am. What am I here for then? Come with me, we're wasting time." "But here's the friend paid you for the shoes," smiled at Wendy and rubbed you on the head. "Don't worry everything. It's going to be fine." The transfusion went well, the surgery too. The next day Camille recovered, and the doctor called Jenna, allowing her to visit her mother. The young Liam was attracted to the girl, but the moment for acquaintance, to put it mildly, was not suitable. But now was the right time. First of all, it was he who operated on her mother and saved her. Secondly, she was feeling much better, and talking to the girl she liked now was a good time. But whose? Jenna hadn't gotten a good look at the doctor. Now, when she went on a date with her mom, she noticed his broad shoulders, green eyes, and charming smile. He wasn't canonically handsome like her father, but there was something about him that drew attention to him. How charismatic, she thought. They got to talking, and Jenna unexpectedly told the doctor that since childhood she liked to take care of animals and give them first aid, that she wanted to go to medical school. But then she decided to become a model. But she did not succeed in this field because she was not tall enough. Slava listened and smiled. He liked the girl with her directness even more. She came from a rich family, and she was not spoiled, pure, Liam thought. "Let's talk on the first name." He suggested it. Come on, Jenna said yes. And about the medical and the catwalk. You know, Steve, of course I have no right to advise you, but as a doctor I say our profession is very necessary and important for life. Regardless of height, weight, or age, to be a good doctor is happiness for the person himself and for those who will come to him for help. Because today there are so many bad doctors who got into medical university by blat and for money. So you think about it, especially if you have been drawn to this profession since childhood. I'll think about it, the girl replied very seriously. They reached Camille's room and quietly went to her mother. Liam went to check on the other patients, giving the girl a chance to talk to her mother alone. Doreen had already been released home, having been given all the necessary recommendations regarding diet and daily regimen. She needed to regain her strength. Mommy, the girl rushed to Camille's bedside. Thank God it's all right. Have you seen her yet? Did she come to see you? Yes. Why would she come to my house? Wait, they didn't tell you, did they? She's the one who gave you her blood. Your blood type and Rh factor are the same. It's amazing that Camille's eyes widened in horror. She had a sixth sense that this situation was very, very complicated. And that it was not for nothing that she had been frightened when Irina's friend Louis was introduced to her. But what are you so scared about? It's her father's group. He was a researcher. She and her mom met in Yekaterinburg. By the way, she lived there until she was 17, and then she came to Moscow and became a model. Wait, Camille sat on the bed, just like in Yekaterinburg. And when is her birthday? Oh, that's a joke. On the same day as me too, July. Can you imagine? And we don't have the same year of birth. Camille's eyes are blurry. There's no such thing as coincidence. In an instant, she realized everything. Wendy was her abandoned bush daughter, her own blood daughter. No way. And yesterday she had saved her life by giving her blood to what she thought was a complete stranger. And now she has to live with that. So much for retribution. It wasn't getting away from her. Camille didn't know what to do, so she decided to call her father and ask him to come over. Ethan Dowman, apart from his criminal talents, was a sensible and very intelligent man. In addition, he loved his daughter and never gave away her secrets, even when they were still living with her mother Emily quite peacefully. And Camille told her father her little secrets. Verka did give birth to Ethan, the son of Camille's brother. Benjamin had just turned 15 years old. Benjamin grew up a quiet boy and did not cause much trouble to his parents. In spite of puberty, Ethan was very fond of his son, an heir and a late child, more like Anton's age. He was more like a grandfather than a father. And grandfathers are known to spoil their grandchildren. Benjamin did not smoke, did not drink, snorted wedges, and did not even look at drugs. He was an advocate of healthy lifestyle and everything related to it. He loved historical reconstructions, role-playing games, in which he constantly took part. He often came to Moscow if something big was planned. By the way, in early August, a week later there was to be a historical reconstruction of the 13th century. It was supposed to be interesting. The organizers promised knights' duels, making some hats and crossbow clothing, as well as painting shields and even minting medieval coins grandfatherly way. Of course, cooking and wine for adults is a great excuse you have to call. I've recovered in a week, and we'll talk informally. Camille thought. Daddy, hello. She dialed her father and heard his voice. Hello, daughter. Good to hear from you. Dad, we're having a very interesting reenactment in a week. Come on down, it's going to be awesome. And you and I will finally get to hang out. I haven't seen you in 100 years. Yeah, what kind of reenactment? 13th century and everything that goes with it. I hope they don't invent the plague wand and burn witches at the stake. The organizers will probably avoid such extremes. Camille replied, smiling in her father's tone. Her father always knew how to cheer her up. A few years ago, his parliamentary activity was over. And in time, it should be said, because his comrades in the party and some scams straight from the parliament went straight to the dungeons in places not so remote. As they say, greed has ruined the fool. They did not want to stop in time. And all those years of working for decent people to hell. Ethan had a wolf's instinct for such things, and he realized that the money he made would be enough for him and Evelyn, and Gold and Vazia and their children. Well, I'll consult with the heir, and I'll let you know his decision. Though I think he won't refuse. Especially since you say they're going to mint coins. I'd like to be a part of it myself. You know how much I love base metal. All right, Dad, I'll be waiting. I'm about to be released from the hospital, Camille accidentally said. They didn't tell Dad about the accident. They didn't want to alarm him, especially since everything turned out okay. What hospital? What happened and you didn't tell me? Dad, it was just plastic surgery. I was just fixing some wrinkles. Did something scare you? Yes, I did. That's my beautician too. She's running around like crazy, afraid she's getting old. And I'll find a new young one. Silly, I love her. All right, see you in a week. Ethan and Benjamin arrived. Camille was weak but quite well. She was doing her best to hide from her father that she'd almost died. The bruises on her face were almost gone, but they could be blamed on the aftermath. After the plastic surgery, they packed up and drove to the reconstruction site. Dad, we need to talk, Camille asked, looking into her father's eyes. Did something happen to you? Yeah, I can feel it. Yeah, Dad, this is going to be a tough conversation. You'll probably despise me and even hate me afterward. But I have to tell you. Ethan looked at his daughter in surprise. It was very unlike Gold, and she hadn't had any sins in recent years. She was a very good wife to Vaclav and a great mother to Jenna. They went to the gazebo, letting Benjamin go jousting, and Camille told everything to her father as a priest too. Ethan was silent, with his head down on his arm. Give me a cigarette, he asked. You quit. Through tears, Camille said, having quit with you. Daughter of a drag, said Ethan. I have no right to judge you. You know I've never been known for crystal honesty, nor have I been a paragon of integrity. What you did was a great sin, of course. But you raised that dead woman's child as your own. And besides, your daughter, thank God, survived. And the money you left behind seems to have fallen into the right hands, since Wendy says they have a big house and her father's been sending them help over the years. Her foster mom probably told her the story. So the girl wouldn't feel fatherless. Speaking of which, let's do it anyway. Genetic testing. Find an excuse to invite her to get her hair done at your house. Will the hair be suitable for that purpose? Okay, calm down. Camille obediently agreed. When they returned, Camille informed Jenna that she planned to organize a master class on hairstyling in her living room, and that she would be sure to invite a friend if he wanted to attend. Steve, and very excited, and immediately called her friend. Wendy got excited as well. She was very worried, feeling some kind of tension in the behavior of Jenna's mother. On Friday, they gathered in Camille's living room. She quietly scrutinized the girl as she did her hair, and noticed in her face and her features the shape of her hands, the smile as she raised her eyebrows upward. It was purely a chameleon gesture. When everyone had left, she gathered up her hair and handed it to her father for examination. 2 days later, Ethan came and brought the result. A 99.9% match is your biological daughter and my granddaughter Camille. That's it, baby. What are we gonna do, Dad? Nothing. Live like we did and help her out as the mother of a friend? Absolutely not. That's a secret you can't tell anyone. After all, those people who adopted the girl, I think, had to pay for the issuance of documents. Otherwise, Sophie would have gone through the orphanage before she was adopted. And considering she'd hardly get a hammer, there's no one willing. Camille, she was found the same night you left her there. She gave her date of birth as Jenny. One more thing. Give me the ashtray. He took the forensic certificate and burned it. God forbid Jenna finds it, or Wenceslas. Papa. Papa. I love you so much. Thank you. Camille cuddled up to her father and cried softly. You'll have it, you'll have it. All's well that ends well. Stroking his daughter's head, Ethan said, and things did indeed work out well for them. Doreen was soon invited to be the face of a fashion brand, and she went with her Louis to work on a contract in the USA. She would often call Jenna from there and they would chat on video mode. Jenna gave up her delusions about the catwalk and enrolled in medical school. Studying was easy for her, and she interned with her husband Slava. Yes, a year after these events, the young people married. Benjamin enrolled at the Faculty of History. Nancy's grandmother and Nancy herself rejoiced at her gift from God. Wendy never regretted that they had not been afraid years ago to take on such a responsibility. And Camille went to the temple every weekend and asked for forgiveness for her sin and protection for her two daughters. And of course, God heard her, for a mother's prayer will reach from the bottom of the sea.